No Game, No Life, Volume 5, Chapter 3. In a dream, Azrael relived her memories of her lord, Artosh. The havoc of war, continuing endlessly, served only to fuel Artosh, god of war, in old days to whom hatred, malevolence, hostility, and blood were daily bread. Artosh, lord of chaos. By this point, the fragments of his 18 wings, the flugel wings, and his messenger had been Haim. One god, one phantasm, and one race. This small army was overpowering the world. The throne of the one true god belonged to Artosh. By now, no one could doubt this. This was their lord, and yet he had spoken of the possibility of defeat. Just once. I may be defeated. You jest. I am strong. Of course, Lord. By now there is none with power superior to mine. Of course, Lord. Therefore there are things beyond my ken. Things you do not understand, Lord? By that which is beyond my ken, by that which the weak alone understand, by that which is unknown to me for my strength, I may be defeated. Therefore, I shall create a being with the imperfection that, to one so mighty as me, can never be kenned. Imperfection, Lord? Can imperfection serve as perfection? Can it serve transcending paradox? I know not. However, should I succeed or should I fail, this must be the cause. Thou who art one of my 18 wings, the first of all, Azrael. Yes, Lord. At such a time as I have been vanquished and banished from this world, thou, in the guise of defeat, shalt take the measure of this in my stead, that I may rest in peace. Azrael didn't know what it was that her lord saw, but the expression on our Lord's face as he suggested the possibility of defeat was not fear, but merely, like that of a god of war, a wish for an unknown entity to appear, and the drive to vanquish even that unknown. Just a vicious, but terribly amused smile. Now I shall create a unit outside the series. I shall name her... And then her lord, Artosh, created what soon would become that by which he would be remembered. The irregular number, the final number, the imperfect one. The one who might look to the horizon that, in the end, even her lord could not grasp or see beyond. He called her by name, ch.3. Elder, are you awake at last? Her entire body was leaden. That was Azrael's first impression as she awoke. Her wings wouldn't move, her body wouldn't rise. No, to begin with, her body didn't know what it meant to rise. She realized. How did you move this body? Like licking space, wasn't it? The ground. Since when was it so strong, fettering her body like this? Lifting her head that felt like a weight, Azrael peered up at the shadows looming over her. Gazing down at her, Jabril, and the two amenities, Sor and Shiro. Exceed, rank bottom, the weakest race, looked back down on her and spoke. So, you're all I pwned Joe on the strength of your cheats, and then you say the game is broken 'cause you game over once? WTF? Shiro grinned as Sora laughed, but unable to grasp the meaning of his words. Give it another try from the beginning, as a pawn. If you do that and still think it's broken, we'll play you all you want. Azrael nevertheless understood that the word pounded into her had constrained her power to the level of a manatee. She cast her eyes down and chuckled at the siblings, who smiled as they explained it to her. So that's how it was. She couldn't fly. She couldn't use magic. She couldn't even see spirits. Distance and weight, concepts of which she had never before been conscious, tied her body down. She rolled onto her back. worked her restricted hand, and reached up towards the sky. It was so high, so broad. The force that held her body to the ground felt as if it had created an insurmountable wall between the earth and the sky. To think she could fly out there was now beyond her imagination. Even if she were told she could fly, she wouldn't even feel like it. She didn't have the nerve. Meanwhile, those who had supposedly played with her, smiling and dancing through that sky, though possessed of the same abilities, the two humanities asked, "How's the ground taste? Not bad, right?" After all, you don't really want to fly again until you crash once. Having soared through those heavens with alacrity, yet saying crashing wasn't bad. Come on, when you fall, you gotta jump back up. Next round's coming, right? Extending his hand with a smile. Yes, as if to say, just as we've done. At last, everything came together within Azrael, and a grin spilled out. Late. Ridiculously late. Given that, she couldn't complain if they called her stupid. But Azrael took his hand. "Elder, you are too hard-headed." Watching with cool yet gentle eyes as Azrael stood, Jabril greeted her. The one by whom Artosh was remembered, the imperfect one, the irregular number, and the final number, imperfection. What it meant was the quest to be perfect. Because one was imperfect, one reached for the unknown, for the future, for hope, reached to grasp them. The reason Jabril had insisted on hunting alone at last. "Jibs, you're too soft-hearted." Without even being ordered, wiping out an elven metropolis and coming back with a grin and an armload of books. Having been told she lacked the specs, going off to slay a hired race single-handedly, and returning on the brink of death. Abandoning the council and fleeing her homeland, then coming back with new masters. Truly, she was unquestionably imperfect, and, for that reason, had become stronger than anyone. "I get it. Just reading books isn't enough to teach you anything." Understanding was never a matter of just memorizing facts to increase one's knowledge. It was something that came from doing, from bashing oneself, till it finally soaked into the bones. What neither Artosh nor Azrael had ever been able to grasp was the unknown. What it was, the possibility. Surely, the ability to make the impossible possible. Something that, as strong as the ones who never failed, the ones who never lost, was beyond their ability to conceptualize. And yet, living in the guise of the defeated already made me imperfect. I was just scared. It was only Jabril who had started to sense it before they tasted defeat. With their failure, the Flugel and Edmundheim as well had reached imperfection. So then, with their pissing and whining, it was no wonder they'd be forsaken, because of Flugel's, including Azrael's, inability to do anything but collect knowledge. Only Jabril went freely where her curiosity led her to create knowledge and to leave behind what she had gained. Despite her overwhelming strength, she was still aimed higher, embracing her adoration for the unknown. There was only one thing that could mean. It's so daft. Now that I see it, it's so awfully daft." Lowering her face, Azrael could only laugh now, prompting Jabril to inquire. "I take it that now you understand." "Yes, I get it. That there was never anything to understand." How could one help but laugh? To think that the answer for which they'd searched for 6,000 years was, there is no answer. "The unknown can never become the known, for the known thereafter becomes the unknown. There is no end. Yesterday's wisdom is today's folly." Having never lost before, ever since the first defeat, Azrael had feared it through and through, the unknown. The more she tried to understand it, the further it receded. "Therefore we shall not memorize, but learn. We shall enjoy the risks that come with change." And so she could only approach it, stepping out boldly.
It was our inability to do this that lost us the war. Elder Ezreal, when I lost my masters, knelt before them and vowed to serve them. Artosh's final mission had been fulfilled. Her eyes still downcast, Ezreal whispered, Lord Artosh, have I too finally fulfilled your last request? Can I finally stop lying? Wiping the tears that trailed down her cheeks, Ezreal looked humbly to the faraway heavens. She possessed such an ability, one she'd never known, but perhaps with this he could rest in peace. Sora broke the moment, studying her face like a pepper. I don't really get it, but you are careful looking cute after all, huh? At last, for the first time, he smiled as he addressed Ezreal. Can I ask you 4 questions, Amanides? No, I mean Sora and Shiro. Indeed, there was no answer. She'd come all the way back to the start, in which case, there was something she needed to check. You guys, what do you live for? Shiro. Brother. What would you do if one of you died? When we die, it'll be together, so that's irrelevant. What he said. You guys, what were you born for? Dunno. Yeah. We don't have time to think about that shit. Unlike you ladies, our life is short. We're so busy. All instantaneous answers. Sora with a smile, Shiro dead serious. But they weren't her answers. They could only be used for reference. So, finally, Ezreal asked, Can I be Jibs? Nope, you can only be yourself. An instant answer, of course. Ezreal had known, but clouded a bit, which prompted Sora to ask, Well, but so what? Like a cloudlessness. Yes, true to his name. Right now, you look cute. I like you the way you are now. Sky, he beamed. After searching for thousands of years, I go back to the start. Living forever is tiring. Yes, those they came up with themselves, their very own answers. She would search for herself and, like Jabril, find her own meaning. As long as I know that I can, that's enough, Ezreal mumbled tiredly. But then she heard Jabril apologizing to Sora. Master, to have wagered my life without consulting you, and still to have relied on your power to the very end. I truly cannot... Oh, about that, Jabril. Scratching his head as if it was hard to say, Sora told her, This chick hasn't got the right to command all the Flugo to kill themselves, you know. Pardon? Leaving the flabbergasted Jabril in the dust, Ezreal smirked. Oops, did you figure it out? Sticking out her tongue mischievously, she gave a nyeh. Forbidding you from killing yourself without permission doesn't mean I can command you to kill yourself. It's amazing no one figured it out in these 6,000 years. A lie like that. Shiro pounded in one more nail on top of this. Even if it were the case, Jabril belongs to us, so... Having involved her masters, even preparing for death, Jabril's shoulders began to quake. But sighing, Sora told her, But Ezreal could do it herself, sure. At his sharp tone, Jabril gasped, and Ezreal stopped smiling. From the beginning, she was only putting herself on the table. She was probably planning to kill herself no matter what. I mean, what kind of sister would ask her own little sister to die? Jabril, isn't she the big sister you believed in? The response, silence followed by a sigh, affirming Sora's words more eloquently than anything else could have. Given that there was an answer, and that the Flugel were capable of reaching it, even if Ezreal were to return the ability to commit suicide her sisters had entrusted to her, by now they probably wouldn't do it, even if there was no answer. If, like Jabril, they could all find a reason not to die, there was no reason to expect that they'd kill themselves. At which point, Ezreal, who had lived so that they wouldn't die, would have seen her role end. Sora, a lot of people have gotten mad at you for overstepping boundaries. Oh, yeah they have. But the rule of this game is that no one may die, so...
A resounding whop. Let's play. Sora clapped his hands and grinned. I mean, it sucks to dump your progress and hit new game, right? So let's play. Then, it's simple. All you gotta do is play a different game. A game that's sure to be fun, fun, fun. This world, we're gonna make it way, way more fun for you. A game we'll never get tired of. You think we can do it? Come on, what you gonna bet on? From her heart, for the first time in 6,000 years, no, perhaps ever, she laughed spontaneously. Maybe as a consequence of having her physical performance constrained by amenities. She laughed so hard her stomach hurt. She laughed so hard her eyes were getting teary, and Azrael lifted her face and, deliberately, put her arms around Sora and kissed him. What? Master? Elder Azrael! After several full seconds of tongue kissing, Azrael moved away. There's no such thing as a game where you bet on both sides winning. Blowing off the gazes of the befuddled Sora and the two who glared as if to bore a lethal hole through her, Azrael said, You big kids, I'm really glad you invited me to have fun with you. Right when I wanted to kill myself. But still, I'm not like Jibs. I'm not worthy of being by your side. Yet. She waved and turned, and walked the feeling of gravity that restricted her body. She got her little sister worrying about her. She got the amenities worrying about her. She got consoled. She even got forbidden to kill herself. After all that, she couldn't depend on them anymore. She chuckled to herself. But whatever, I bet that you can. Until then, I'll give Jib's faith a try. The faith in my possibilities she gave me. So I hope you'll give me a little time. Brother, you got her to kiss you. Hey, hold on. She just friggin' did it. You got eyes? Master, with all due respect, the 10 Covenants make a violation of rights impossible. Therefore, the fact that Elder Drill was able to lock lips with you can only mean that you permitted it, consciously or not. Wait. What kind of man would I be if I turned down a babe like that, even unconsciously? Brother, you'll take anyone female? You remind me of Miss Torino. Hey, wait. I mean, look, I'm obviously the victim here. Come on, guys. Cracking a smirk at the din behind her as she walked away, Azrael muttered, By the way, Gypsy. It's finally Gypsy, is it? After you treated my master so abominably, after you lied to us for thousands of years, my mild graces are beginning to reach their limit. But what is it, Elder Azrael? Jib shifted to Big Sister's side as Azrael's call, remarking in ill humor. Azrael dropped a question she thought of herself aloud. Gypsy, how do you think humanity was able to survive the Great War? Well, a long-standing question. A question that had tormented Jabril with special intensity recently. The standing theory was that they had been so weak that no one paid them heed, and they had just happened to survive. But since meeting Sora and Shiro, Jabril had begun to sense something amiss. Could it just have happened that, as of the end of the war, the entire continent of Lagunica was the territory of Amanity? Amanity, once their power. Israel thought of it herself and expounded. To lose and lose, till one will lose no more. Shall we suppose that is Amanity? Taking defeat and failure as a given and learning every time. Not fearing the unknown, but throwing themselves into it with glee. The most imperfect race, which for that very reason thirsted more than any to be perfect. If they supposed that, Ezra chuckled. Why had they survived? No. Why did we ever watch out for such a race in the war? Shiro gasped. Not just her 2 lords, but the old king who had laid bare the game of the Eastern Union, and Clammy, who had collaborated with the elves, had, together, shown her the possibilities of the race, enough to inspire awe and dread by now, intimately familiar to her. A race of people, sometimes mad, giving themselves over to death itself, and yet who invariably made it through to the next round.
A race that learns without end. I wonder why we never noticed such a threat.
It meant that, no matter how frail they might be, if they kept it up forever, inevitably, at some point, they would become an inescapable threat. Had they realized the nature of such a race during the war, what would they have done? There was no need to think about it. They'd be too dangerous. They'd be wiped out on the spot.
And yet, the records of humanity are non-existent. Wonder why?
Yes, records of humanity during the Great War were completely non-existent. Unnaturally so.
Well, this is just something I thought of. Could it be?
Ezreal looked at Sora and Shiro.
They tricked us from moving all the front lines away from Lucia.
Yes, that sounded just like something they would do.
And we never were able to figure out what those ex-machinas who slew Lord Artosh were doing towards the end of the war. So,
smiling with all but her eyes, Ezreal conjectured.
What if humanity led them?
What if the death of Artosh, which sparked the end of the Great War, had been planned?
Maybe I'm just overthinking it.
And then Ezreal walked off, leaving the stunned Jabril behind, even though she thought she'd strode a good distance away. She found that she hadn't gone anywhere, that Jabril had not witnessed her grand exit, but stood calmly beside her, was so funny.
Gypsy, I'm gonna take that kid's suggestion and live with this body for a while. And also,
she smiled,
at the next assembly, I'm gonna propose that Advenheim join the Commonwealth of Velkia. I must say, I still doubt it would pass.
It would be a dream for her as well, Jabril thought to herself. But Ezreal plied her with a huge, slimy smirk.
We'll observe and learn from Velkia. We'll be a member in name only, so that everyone can find the answer we found. Fulfill Lord Artosh's final mission. How's that for a pretext?
Her expression implied that it wasn't for nothing. She managed to fool them for 6,000 years.
I must say that it does sound difficult to refuse.
To begin with, Advenheim was a force without allegiance. It had no territory or resources. Even if they attained formal membership, it didn't mean they'd have to help. They could simply involve themselves in the things they wanted to, and if the plenipotentiary herself said it was for Artosh, the Flugel would have no reason to refuse. If Ezreal possessed that kind of mental dexterity, then why? Shiro sighed.
Flugel, including me, can't recognize these kids as the new lords until we all see for ourselves that their potential is worthy of our faith. You know this, right?
Yes,
everyone should be aware of that. I shall continue my missionary efforts, so there is no cause for concern.
Jabril displayed her holy journal and dismissed it, as a simple matter of building the fan base. Faith. At this, Ezreal chuckled and looked back at her.
For now, you can personally take care of them for me, Gypsy.
These two were a ball of the unknown. By now, Ezreal understood what made them so appealing, but at the same time, they were too risky. Smirking to herself that she couldn't have them dying before a conclusion was reached.
May I ask this not as the plenipotentiary, but as a friend?
Jabril fell back into her usual demeanor.
It goes without saying that I intend to protect my masters with my life, so I refuse. I see.
Implying that they weren't friends. Well, of course. After all she'd done, how could she presume to?
But if you take too long, you'll miss the highlights, elder sister.
Jabril grinned as she slipped in that sister.
Don't worry, little sister. I'll be coming to get you real soon.
Smiling to hold back the tears, she trotted off,
After all, she managed to change herself in a single hour. It shouldn't take too long. Taking her leave, she stopped in her tracks, turned and sighed, waved. Hey everybody, would somebody piggyback me? And I want to convene an assembly real quick. I need a road to my house, at least. It'd be nice if someone could lay out a road for me. She strolled home, her power still sealed. Being unable to do things like fly was somehow refreshing. Filled with frivolous thoughts like this, she chuckled to herself, finding every little thing amusing. With her feet on the ground, her gaze level with theirs, her speed no greater than an ant's march, she drank in the world. After living for 26,000 years, it wasn't so bad to try something new. Will you accept them as our new lords?
I'm not the one to decide that. Heaven, you should think about it yourself, too.
Perplexing proposal, but deemed worthy of trial.
Well, to be honest, I do think maybe submitting them for a bit would be all right.
For their potential? At this question, Azrael flapped her flightless wings through the air and replied, Because it would be fun. Excitement filled her heart just thinking about what kind of game they could play next.
Meanwhile, Royal capital, the study of the previous king. Next to Azuna, who had busied herself laying waste to a seafood spread of royal proportions, Steph skimmed a book. Glancing at Azuna, who was devouring the food she prepared with true gusto, she remarked, Miss Azuna, you really are quite the eater. It was so heartwarming, but then, when she remembered that Azuna's grandfather's life was on the line, she started to wonder. Azuna was desperate, too. She'd been trying, giving it her all. But strangely, Steph could detect in her bearing no panic, no agitation, no unease. This is difficult to say, but, Miss Azuna, are you not worried about Mr. Reno? Grinding to a sharp halt, a fish still in her mouth, Azuna answered flatly, Hell no, please. Why would I be worried, please? Why would you... Sora and Shiro said, Don't worry, we'll save him, please. Azuna laid it out without a speck of doubt and resumed her meal. With a sigh, Steph returned her attention to the book in her hands and grumbled. A little question had been bothering her for a while. How is it that you and the Shrine Maiden are able to trust those liars so much? It was true that they always came through in the end somehow, but the path was always too steeped in lies and fraud. How could they trust? Steph ruminated, but Azuna came back at her with a glare. Sora and Shiro's aren't liars, please. Miss Azuna, though you have learned to read the Humanity tongue, it appears you are not yet fully proficient. If those two weren't liars, then what were? Steph chuckled. They don't smell like liars. Like those damn liars who smell like gotcha, bitch. I hate that smell, please. Steph was at a loss for words. Azuna remembered that day when Sora said he'd save her grandfather. Sora's scent that she'd picked up at the beach. It had put her at ease. She gave Steph a little smile. Sora and Shiro smell good, please. Those assholes fool people. Lead them on. Tease them, please. But they never lie, please. That's why I like them, please. Schooled by a girl of 1-digit age, Steph took a breath. It was absurd, and yet it explained things. A strange comprehension flickered through her brain. Sora, that born fraud who breathed lies. How was it that even so, at times, he reminded her of her grandfather? When she thought about it, it was obvious. If he was so good at lying, then why carry himself in such a way as to always be suspected a liar? Why wouldn't he pretend to be a good person? Steph noticed Azuna suddenly studying her coolly. Stutch, you smell good too, please. But sometimes you smell like a liar, please. Huh? When did I ever lie to you? When you talk about Sora, you smell like a damn liar, please. I don't like you like that, please. That's because Sora forced me to fall in love with him. Isn't it natural I would resist? Hurt by the implication that Azuna disliked her, Steph argued with a lump in her throat, but Azuna dismissed her with a complicated expression. "More of your shit, please. But you usually smell good, so I'll give you a pass, please." This said, she went back to stuffing her face with fish, leaving Steph with her thoughts. All right, let's suppose for the sake of argument, not that there could very well be an argument, that Sora isn't a liar. But even so, that doesn't justify him co-opting my feelings with the Covenants. It's complete nonsense. As Steph clutched her head in her outburst, a book caught her eye. On a shelf some distance away, a book with an ancient binding. The Treasure of the Prideful Princess. A children's tale? A title written in Amanity that sounded as if it belonged in a nursery. When she opened the cover, this is what was written. "This is a fairy tale passed down among the dwarves." A translation? The translator isn't my grandfather, it would appear. What is this book doing? Steph mumbled, turning the page, and gasped. This is what was written there. "This is a fairy tale from far in the past, farther than the sea." And beneath, in a familiar hand, that is, the hand of her grandfather, was a note. "We surmise that the sleeping queen of the sea read this tale before her slumber. Like the princess in the tale, the queen was loved by all and possessed by all. And thus, she desired what she knew not. Having everything, she craved the one thing that eluded her, a love beyond her reach." Eureka! Azuna stared at Steph, as Steph sprang from her chair with a cry. Affenheim, a relatively large cube in the central district. This was Jabril's former dwelling, now a storeroom. She must have moved all her books and valuables to the library in Elkia, for it didn't have the feel of a living space. As might be expected of a flugel who required no sleep, there was no bed. There were no windows either. The sealed room, lined with her collection of non-book treasures, felt surprisingly comfortable to shadow dwellers like Sora, Shiro, and Plum, as long as they were mindful of certain warnings she gave them. "Oh, Master, you better not touch those. You will probably, no certainly die. Spoils from the Great War, masses of skulls, and so on, but this is weird." In the center of the room rested the books which the nigh 100 flugel had collected for them, as sworn by the Covenants. Buried in the pile of books, dark with fatigue, Sora complained bemusedly. Shiro on his lap was writing something, then crossed it out angrily, groaning. "Masters, why do you not take a respite?" Recognizing that the siblings were frustrated with their lack of progress, Jabril chided them softly. Immediately following the game, the two had dived straight into the books collected for their information. Recording her gospel, Jabril suddenly realized it had been about 5 days since her masters had slept, before Plum arrived. With this in mind, she urged them, but Sora scratched his head, seemingly oblivious to her. "How is it that there are 19 accounts, and they're all the same on the condition to wake her?" "No, don't tell me it was all a waste." The encounter at the end of the game, the right to deceive even Israel, who had absorbed the power of a phantasma. Plum, exhausted from her efforts, lay sprawled on the floor, squeaking pitifully with what remained of her breath. To think she'd done all that and it was meaningless. Her expression lost all hope, but Sora pushed forwards. "The problem goes deeper than that. I'll sum it up, okay?" With a sigh, he turned to Plum. "Siren's queen is their agent plenipotentiary. The queen bet all of her rights and then went to sleep. But for Siren, if someone wakes her up, that person would get their race piece, and that would be fatal. So they covered up the condition to wake the queen." Yes, that's right." The ultimate way to cover something up is if no one knows. So they didn't tell you how to wake her up either. But when the current queen went to sleep, she wasn't queen yet. Siren must have tried everything they could to wake her, but that would mean someone knew once. But the current accounts have been falsified. "You following me?" Sora asked, and Plum nodded. 800 years ago, there were guys who tried to beat the queen's game. We can see 16 of them from just the records we've dug up in Adventheim, covering 5 different races, and we can see the words that were supposedly used. If we compare them, we should be able to trace them back to the condition to wake her. Or so I thought. Shiro moaned, and collapsed into Sora's lap, brain fried. They checked the verbiage in the languages of 5 races. They even verified the manner of the word's interpretation, but whoever wakes the queen will win the queen's love and everything she has. That's all we can get. Whoever wakes the queen, i.e., she didn't have to fall in love, wins everything, i.e., you got all the rights. Those 2 things had been nailed down, but this was worthless by now. The real thing was, Sora griped, why don't they say how you wake her? Is that really the part they'd leave out? Before the previous queen had passed, someone getting all the rights wouldn't have impinged on the race's survival. They should have announced the victory condition to get someone to hurry up and beat it already. But then, if no such thing was recorded, worst case scenario. Huh? At Shiro's dire assessment, Plum sorrowfully sought clarification. No one ever knew. How? Could be that even the queen herself didn't spell out the victory conditions clearly when she made the game. For example, after a deep sigh, Sora wrung it out. Please me, except I don't know what will please me, or something like that. Plum's eyes rolled back in her head, and she fell. Frankly, Sora felt like doing the same. If this was true, it would explain why no one had been able to wake her. Why Plum hadn't been able to figure out how you wake her. Why a spell that would make her fall in love unconditionally worked, but she still didn't wake her. And also, how Siren had been able to cover it up completely. Everything. If no one knew from the beginning, then there was nothing to cover up. And then they'd have to attack the problem from the standpoint of, what did the queen want when she slept? They were back to square one. Aw, shit, what's wrong with this bitch? Oozing distress, Sora wrenched and flopped onto the floor. Shiro also went GG, audibly snoring on Sora's lap, and Plum passed out. The scene looked as if it would hang perfectly in an art museum, under the title, Despair. Well, why don't I tell you a story for a change of pace? Jabro lightly snapped her fingers, and the walls and the ceiling of her house went clear as glass. As he lay sprawled on the floor, Sora saw the night unfold above him. No, that wasn't it. They floated in the edge of the stratosphere, the border between this planet and space. So it was space. This realization was accompanied by a soothing reverberation, like the cry of a whale. What was... It is he. 'Twas the voice of the Adventheim, the Phantasma. Now that she mentioned it, Sora remembered seeing a landmass like a giant whale during the game with Israel. The fact that he was riding on its back right now was so fantastic that it was easy to forget. He was once a messenger of my former lord, the old Deus Artosh. Azrael continued with a faraway look in her eyes. Artosh fell at the end of the Great War, but he has yet to accept this. He drifts in search of Artosh, and when he feels the presence of an old Deus, he approaches. Jabro cast her gaze up, to the vermilion moon floating in the sky. Out there are the elementals, Lunamana, and the old Deus who created them. The giant red moon Sora had seen any number of times, either larger or closer than the moon of his old world. It was still hard to imagine that an Exseed dwelled there. When the red moon is invisible, Adventheim raises its altitude at the presence of the old Deus. However, with a complicated, somewhat sad smile, Jabril confessed, Adventheim cannot reach it. Can't reach it? Adventheim is not flying through the sky, but circling the planet, swimming along the currents of the spirits invisible to humanity. He cannot swim in space, which lacks these, and so, Sora unconsciously followed Jabril's gaze and was speechless. He never looked at the Milky Way with his own eyes, but a river of stars that gave the images he'd seen on the internet a run for their money floated in the emptiness. The light flowed as if to outshine the red moon. He looks at the red moon and weeps. The torrent of light flowed like an aurora, flickering faintly. Again, the whale-like moan he'd heard before. This time it sounded terribly lonesome. So, Phantasmas had feelings? Exceed, rank 2, Phantasma. Considering that they were listed among the Exceeds, and that Ezreal had said we, it made perfect sense, Sora realized. But still, it was strange to think that this land mass drifting through the sky had feelings. And then, whoop, it hit him, and he griped in disgust. So even Adventheim understands romantic love, and I don't? Pardon, why do you suppose he understands it? He feels a sense of romance about Artosh, and loves him as his master. So he understands both romance and love, right? Then Jabril seemed to latch onto something and asked, Master, is there anyone you would be lost without? Shiro. And is there anyone you love? Shiro. So just because you understand romance and love, it's not the same thing as romantic love. Love took different forms for each. Man, this concept was a total pain in the ass. If the Queen's wish when she went to sleep really did have something to do with romantic love, it was shit out of luck. Sora capitulated, but Jabril was thinking of something else. I wonder if that's really how it is. When Artosh was slain, Jabril, like the rest of the Flugel, felt loss. After that, the Flugel gathered knowledge, searching for something without knowing what. A meaning of life, a justification for existence, a reason not to die. An answer that could never be, but Jabril found it. The answer that there was no universal answer, that yet she herself could want to exist. What's up, Jabril? It was not knowledge, but the unknown before her that made her cock her head with doubt. What if... Master, please excuse my impertinence, but may I ask a favor of you? What? Could you say, you're useless, Jabril. I'm done with you. Let me just point out, I have no idea what you're getting at here. Please, ask nothing. Humor me, if you would. As Jabril pressed her forehead deeply to the floor, Sora reluctantly did as she asked. You're useless, Jabril. I'm done with you. That good? Master! Yes? A shift brought her face close enough to touch his, and Sora shrieked. Why is it that I feel much as I did the other day when you commanded me to lick the feet of that Long-Ear, or when I stole Lord Shiro from you in the FPS with the Eastern Union? A shuddering thrill, as if my very heart is being squeezed. What is this unknown emotion? Hell if I know! Dude, you don't have enough freaky character traits? As Jabril panted, blushed, and practically drooled, Sora cringed away. But having seemingly experienced some kind of deep epiphany, Jabril nodded and announced, Master, for the first time in the 6,407 years since my birth, I have grasped the nature of romantic love. What? Seriously? Yes, at last I shall prove my worth to you, Master. What, then, is love? With this rhetorical question, Jabril knelt before Sora, hung her head, and launched into an explanation. Master, you have ordered little Dora to love you by the covenants, whereupon you have systematically subjected her to the humiliation of neglect. And yet Dora herself, in whom you have planted the emotion, testifies that this is romantic love. This unknown emotion that occurs when my lord, to whom I have devoted myself, tells me he is finished with me. This mixture of endearment, pain, assurance, and all sorts of other thrilling feelings. This is love. Jabril, calm down. You're getting way out of control in so many... Sora muttered, now unmistakably cringing. Wham! Suddenly, Shiro bounded to her feet. Whoa! Oh, what is it, Shiro? My heart almost jumped out of my chest. Not appearing to give a crap to Sora's feelings on the matter. Unknown emotion. She doesn't know it. She can't reach it. She aspires to it. Azrael couldn't find it. Jabril found it. Steph feels it. Unknown. Yet to come... hope. Perhaps eavesdropping on the conversation while feigning sleep, Shiro ticked off a series of data points and furiously scrambled through the books. The queen who enchants everyone. The victory conditions haven't been falsified. Mumbling this with a whoop, she closed the book she'd furiously extracted, and then she declared, Brother, I have figured out the condition to wake the queen. At this simple statement, Sora, Jabril, and even Plum jumped up and stared at Shiro, who looked somehow happy. No. Brother, even you can misread things. Her smile clearly indicated utter ebullience, contrasted with her usual disposition. Brother, brother, you screwed up. Her shoulders swayed, her feet flapped. She beamed as if gloating. Her meaning was undecipherable. Sora groaned, aghast. Hey, wait. What? I misread things? But reading people is my... Right, your specialty. But this time, I win. As if giddy from the heart, Shiro boasted that in this game, for the first time, she'd outread her brother, and Sora felt dizzy. No way. If I lose at reading people, logic, and strategy, what purpose do I... Blank, the 2-in-1 gamer who was the strongest humanity had to offer. If one of its brains could no longer read people... Ignoring Sora as he devolved into tears, Plum pressed insistently.